Racist cops slapped a black woman in court. Moments later she took. Before we dive into today's powerful story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss stories that will touch your heart, challenge your mind, and inspire your soul. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Richard Denton, the billionaire property mogul and CEO of Denton Enterprises, entered the courtroom like he owned it, because in many ways, he did. Denton's company controlled half the city's housing. The man was known for his ruthless efficiency, one missed payment, and families were thrown out without mercy. Beside him stood Officer Bradley, tall, broad, and smug, the same officer who had harassed Amara months earlier when she tried to file a complaint about her landlord. Bradley had laughed in her face, told her she was lucky not to be arrested herself. Seeing them together now felt like fate mocking her. Denton's eyes swept over the room and landed on Amara. He sneered. Bradley leaned down to whisper something, and both men chuckled. Amara's chest tightened, but she straightened her shoulders. "I belong here," she told herself. "I have every right to speak." When the judge entered, everyone rose. The gavel struck, echoing like thunder. Denton's lawyer delivered his opening remarks with polished arrogance, painting Amara as a disgruntled tenant looking for handouts. When it was Amara's turn to speak, she rose slowly, clutching her folder like armor. "Your Honor," she began, her voice trembling but firm, "this isn't just about me. It's about a pattern of neglect, intimidation, and discrimination." But she barely finished before Bradley cut in from the gallery. "This is a joke. She doesn't even know the law. Just another angry woman trying to play victim." The courtroom chuckled. The judge gave no rebuke. Heat rushed to Amara's face. She fought to steady her breath. She tried again, presenting photos of broken plumbing, mold, ignored maintenance requests. But Denton leaned back smirking, and said loud enough for all to hear, "You should be grateful you even had a roof over your head. Women like you should know their place." Laughter rippled through the room. The judge did nothing. Amara's throat closed. Her knees weakened. She wanted to scream, to fight, but her voice felt trapped. The gavel banged again, not for justice, but for silence. The judge dismissed her arguments without review, siding with Denton's lawyers before the trial even seemed to begin. Just like that, the case was over. Amara stood frozen, shame burning hotter than fire. She had walked into the courthouse with dignity, but dignity was stripped from her in front of strangers who now looked at her with either pity or disdain. As she turned to leave, Bradley leaned close enough for her to smell his cologne. "Told you, sweetheart. People like you don't win in here." Amara's hands shook. Her eyes stung. But as she stepped out into the blazing sun, something unexpected rose inside her, not defeat, but defiance. On the courthouse steps, cameras flashed. Reporters swarmed Denton, asking questions. None asked Amara. But as she walked past, an older black woman reached out, gently grasping her hand. Her voice was soft, trembling with both pain and hope. "Baby, I saw what they did to you. Don't let them break you. We need you to keep fighting. We need someone brave enough to stand." Amara's lips parted, but no words came. Tears blurred her vision. The woman squeezed her hand tighter. "One day, you'll sit higher than all of them. I can see it in you." And just like that, a seed was planted. Amara walked down those steps humiliated, yes, but also awakened. She didn't know how or when, but she knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The courtroom went silent as the slap echoed off the marble walls. Her cheek burned red, her dignity shattered under the weight of cruelty. The officers smirked, thinking they'd put her in her place. But no one in that room knew, just hours later, the same woman would rise, not in chains, but in power, taking the judge's seat they never thought she deserved. Reflection question/CTA: Have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated, only for them to rise higher than anyone expected? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might inspire someone today. The courthouse in Atlanta, Georgia, loomed like a fortress of marble and old-world authority, its high stone columns gleaming beneath the September sun. The American flag rippled in the soft breeze out front, a silent promise of liberty and justice, a promise that felt painfully out of reach for Amara Johnson. Amara, a 34-year-old African-American woman, walked up the courthouse steps with her shoulders squared, her chin high. She wore a neatly pressed navy blue blouse and a skirt that brushed her knees. Her hair was braided back into a professional bun, her briefcase tucked firmly under her arm. Outwardly, she looked every inch the strong, educated woman she was. But inside, her stomach churned. She wasn't here today as a lawyer, though she had graduated at the top of her class from Howard Law. She wasn't here as a lecturer, though she taught legal studies part-time at a community college. No, today, she was here as a plaintiff. A woman seeking justice for the harassment she had endured for months at the hands of the Atlanta Police Department. It all began 6 months ago when she'd been pulled over in her own neighborhood. Driving while black, she called it bitterly. What should have been a simple traffic stop turned into hours of humiliation, questioning, and even a night in jail on a fabricated charge that was later dismissed. But the memory of those officers' mocking faces still haunted her. Today was supposed to be different. Today, she had her evidence lined up, her witnesses prepped, her case airtight. She knew the law better than most in that building. She was ready. But the second she stepped inside the courthouse, she felt it, that weighty, hostile energy. 2 officers by the door scanned her from head to toe. Their eyes weren't checking for weapons. They were checking for weakness. "Morning," she said politely. Neither responded. One smirked, the other narrowed his eyes as if daring her to cause trouble. Amara kept walking, refusing to give them the satisfaction of her fear. Inside the courtroom, she sat quietly, reviewing her notes. The room smelled of polished wood and paper. With rows of benches filled by curious onlookers and other plaintiffs waiting for their cases. Across the aisle, the officers she had filed complaints against sat together in uniform. Officer Bradley, tall, broad with a shaved head, leaned back with his arms crossed, smirking. Officer Denton, thinner but with sharp, cruel eyes, whispered something to him. Both chuckled. They weren't worried. They weren't scared. They thought this was just another day of brushing off accountability. The judge hadn't arrived yet, and chatter filled the room. Amara could feel eyes on her, whispers following her every movement. She took a slow breath, centering herself. She reminded herself why she was here, not just for her own dignity, but for the countless others who never made it this far. Finally, the bailiff banged his gavel. "All rise." The courtroom stood as Judge Richard Whitmore entered, a white man in his 60s, with a stern face that looked carved out of granite. He adjusted his glasses, settled into his seat, and nodded. "You may be seated." Amara rose when her case was called, speaking clearly as she introduced herself. "Your Honor, my name is Amara Johnson, representing myself today." Across the room, Officer Bradley snorted. "Of course you are." The judge gave him a sharp look, but said nothing. Amara began presenting her evidence. Her voice was steady, her words precise, weaving through the timeline of events, pointing out every violation of her rights. She showed the dashcam footage, the inconsistencies in the officers' reports, the testimony from a neighbor who had witnessed the incident. For a moment, she felt the tide turning in her favor. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Her case was strong, undeniable. Even the judge leaned forward, intrigued. But that's when it happened. As she returned to her table, Officer Denton muttered something under his breath. Amara turned slightly, frowning. "Excuse me." Before she could react, Bradley stood, striding toward her. "You think you can stand up here and smear our names?" The bailiff moved to intervene, but too late. Bradley's hand shot out. Smack. The slap cracked across her face, so loud it silenced the room. Gasps filled the air. Amara stumbled back, clutching her cheek, her vision blurring with shock. For a moment, time froze. The officer stood over her, unapologetic, his chest heaving with rage. Denton smirked like it was all a joke. The judge slammed his gavel. "Order. Order in this court." But the damage was done. Everyone had seen it, the blatant disrespect, the violence, right here in the very place meant to protect justice. Amara's hand trembled against her cheek. Her skin burned, not just from the sting of the blow but from the humiliation. She could hear the whispers, the murmurs, the doubt creeping into the room. Her mind screamed, "They think they've broken me." But deep inside, something shifted. This was no longer just a case. This was a battle for her very soul. And she wasn't about to lose. Reflection question/CTA. If you were in Amara's shoes, humiliated publicly but burning with quiet strength, Would you fight back harder or walk away? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your perspective. The sting on Amara's cheek lingered long after Officer Bradley's hand had dropped, but it wasn't just the physical pain. It was the sharp, cutting reminder of what so many black women had faced before her: dismissal, disrespect, humiliation. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Gasps, whispers, and a few horrified cries rippled across the benches. The bailiff rushed forward, grabbing Bradley by the arm, but the officer yanked himself free with a smirk, like a man who knew the system would protect him no matter what he did. Order. I said order in this court. Judge Whitmore's gavel slammed again and again, his voice cracking through the noise. Amara stood there, her hand against her cheek, her body trembling, not from fear, but from the storm building inside her chest. Every part of her wanted to scream, to cry, to crumble under the weight of what just happened. But instead, she drew in a slow, deliberate breath. When she lowered her hand, her eyes were steady. Your Honor, she said, her voice calm yet carrying a razor edge, let the record show that I was just assaulted in your courtroom by the very officer I brought here for accountability. The room went silent. Even Judge Whitmore hesitated. His gaze shifted from Amara to the officer, back to her. His lips pressed into a thin line. Bailiff, remove Officer Bradley from this courtroom immediately. But Bradley didn't move. He crossed his arms, glaring down at Amara like a man daring her to push him further. This is ridiculous, he barked. She's lying. Everyone knows she's just trying to ruin my career. She's not lying, a voice shouted from the benches. It was Mrs. Green, Amara's elderly neighbor, who had come to testify on her behalf. I saw everything. Y'all can't keep pretending. Murmurs erupted again. The bailiff stepped forward more firmly this time. Officer Bradley, you need to leave now. Bradley finally relented, raising his hands in mock surrender. Fine. But this is a damn circus, he sneered, shooting Amara one last venomous glare before walking out. Denton followed, smirking as if the two were untouchable. The judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. Miss Johnson, do you wish to proceed with your testimony, or would you prefer to file additional charges for this incident? Amara's lips trembled for the first time. This was the moment. Most people in her shoes would have folded, taken the slap as proof the fight wasn't worth it. That was exactly what Bradley wanted. That was what the system expected. But Amara had spent her entire life preparing for battles like this, even without knowing it. Her grandmother had marched with Dr. King in the 1960s. Her mother had fought for better schools in their neighborhood when no one else would. And now, it was her turn. She straightened her shoulders. Your Honor, she said firmly, I intend to proceed. Because what just happened proves exactly why I'm standing here today. The courtroom hummed with energy. Judge Whitmore nodded slowly. Very well. Continue. Amara returned to her table, her steps measured, her hands tightening around her notes. But she no longer needed them. The slap had burned away her fear. She looked out across the courtroom, locking eyes with Denton, who still lounged like the room was his playground. For the first time, he shifted uncomfortably. Ladies and gentlemen, Amara began, her voice louder now, filling the space, what you just witnessed is not an isolated act. It is a pattern. A pattern of abuse, of disrespect, of violence that people like me, black people, and especially black women, have endured at the hands of those men to protect us. If an officer can do this in front of a judge, in front of a courtroom full of people, imagine what happens when there are no witnesses. Her words struck like thunder. Even those who had come in skeptical sat straighter, eyes fixed on her. She took a step closer to the jury box. This isn't just about me. It's about every single person who has ever been told their voice doesn't matter. It's about justice not being a privilege reserved for a few, but a right guaranteed to all. And if we can't demand accountability here, in this courthouse, then where can we? There was silence. Heavy, thick, but not empty. It was the silence of people listening. People thinking. But not everyone was swayed. When the court recessed for lunch, Amara stepped into the hallway. Instantly, she felt the weight of eyes on her. Some sympathetic. Others hostile. Bradley and Denton waited just beyond the courtroom doors, like wolves in uniform. Bradley's cheek twitched with anger, but Denton leaned against the wall, smirking like always. Nice performance in there, Denton drawled. Got the whole room eating out of your hand. Amara's fists clenched at her sides, but she forced herself to stand tall. The truth doesn't need performance. Denton leaned closer, his voice low so only she could hear. Truth doesn't matter here. Power does. And trust me, sweetheart, we've got plenty of that. For a moment, her chest tightened. Because he wasn't entirely wrong, the system did favor them. But then she thought of her grandmother's worn hands clasped in prayer, her mother's tired smile after long nights of organizing. She smiled faintly. Power without justice isn't strength. It's weakness hiding in a badge. For the first time, Denton's smirk faltered. Back inside the courtroom, Judge Whitmore sat alone in his chambers, staring at a framed picture of his daughter. She was around Amara's age, a lawyer in New York. He imagined what he would do if he saw someone slap her in his courtroom. His jaw tightened. Whitmore wasn't a perfect man. He had his blind spots, his biases, but he couldn't deny what he'd witnessed. Something inside him shifted. When the court resumed, he looked at Amara differently, not as just another plaintiff, but as a woman who refused to bow under humiliation. "Miss Johnson," he said, "you may continue." And she did, stronger, sharper, unshaken. Word of the slap spread quickly. By the end of the day, a small crowd gathered outside the courthouse. Activists, neighbors, community members. Some held signs. Others simply came to show support. As Amara exited after the hearing, she was met with claps and shouts of encouragement. "You stood tall. Don't let them silence you. We're with you, sister." For the first time all day, Amara's eyes welled with tears, not of pain, but of gratitude. She hadn't asked to become a symbol, but here she was, carrying not just her fight, but theirs. And though the battle wasn't over, she realized something profound. The officers thought the slap would break her. Instead, it lit a fire. One that was only beginning to burn. Reflection question/CTA. Do you believe one person's courage can ignite change for an entire community? Drop your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your perspective. The courthouse air felt heavier the next morning. Reporters had gathered on the courthouse steps, microphones poised, cameras flashing. Word of the slap had spread like wildfire across Atlanta, igniting heated debates in coffee shops, workplaces, and barbershops alike. "Woman slapped by cop in courtroom. What does this mean for justice in America?" one headline screamed. "Activist or attention seeker?" another sneered. For Amara, it was no longer just her case. It was a movement. But with attention came danger. That evening, Amara sat at her small kitchen table, papers spread out in front of her, sipping cold tea as she reviewed her notes. The TV buzzed faintly in the background, a news anchor discussing her case. Johnson, who represents herself, has accused 2 Atlanta police officers of racial profiling and misconduct. Yesterday, one of those officers allegedly struck her in court, sparking outrage from community leaders. She muted the screen. She didn't need to hear it. She was living it. Suddenly, headlights swept across her window. A car slowed outside. Her pulse quickened. She peeked through the blinds. A black SUV idled across the street. Her heart thudded. Was it paranoia? Maybe. But when the SUV finally drove off, a cold knot settled in her stomach. They were watching. The next day, court resumed. Amara noticed immediately, Bradley was back. He sat in the front row, arms crossed, his jaw set. His presence was like a shadow creeping across the room, a silent threat. Amara swallowed hard but refused to look away. She stood tall, her notes clutched tightly in her hands. "Miss Johnson," Judge Whitmore said, "you may call your next witness." Amara nodded. "I call Mrs. Green." The elderly woman rose slowly, leaning on her cane, and made her way to the stand. She adjusted her glasses, her wrinkled hands trembling slightly, but her voice was firm. "I saw the whole thing," Mrs. Green testified. "Amara didn't do nothing wrong. Those officers," she pointed a crooked finger at Bradley and Denton, "harassed her from the moment they pulled her over. And yesterday? We all saw it. That man slapped her like she was nothing." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Bradley shifted, his face red. Denton leaned back, sneering. "Objection." Bradley's lawyer barked. "This is hearsay, irrelevant." "Overruled," Judge Whitmore said sharply. Amara allowed herself a small breath of relief. But she knew this was only one small victory in a much larger war. Later that afternoon, as Amara left the courthouse, she felt a hand grab her arm. She spun startled, only to find Bradley's cold eyes boring into hers. "You think you're winning," he hissed. His breath smelled of coffee and bitterness. "You don't know who you're dealing with. We run this city. Not you. Not your people. Us." Amara yanked her arm free, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Then maybe it's time somebody else did." Bradley's lips curled. "You won't last the week." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her frozen on the courthouse steps. For the first time since this battle began, fear sank its claws deep into her heart. That night, she sat on her bed, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the glow of the streetlight outside. Her mind drifted back to childhood. She remembered sitting on her grandmother's porch in Montgomery, listening to stories about the marches, the water hoses, the jail cells. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, "Courage isn't the absence of fear, baby. It's standing anyway, even when your knees shake." Tears welled in Amara's eyes. She whispered into the quiet, "Grandma, I hope I'm strong enough." By the third day of hearings, the courthouse was surrounded by protesters. Signs waved. "Justice for Amara. End police abuse. Her fight is our fight." Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Reporters filled the benches, their pens scratching furiously. Amara continued her testimony, laying out her evidence with precision. Every detail mattered. Every word was a brick in the wall she was building against the officers. But the defense hit back harder. "She's exaggerating," the defense attorney argued. "My clients are decorated officers. They've served this city for years. Miss Johnson simply has a personal vendetta." "Vendetta?" Amara shot back, her voice sharp. "The only vendetta here is the one your clients carry against people who look like me." Gasps. Whispers. The judge's gavel slammed. "Order." But Amara noticed something. Whitmore didn't scold her. He didn't silence her. Instead, his eyes lingered on her, thoughtful, almost proud. On the fourth day, just as Amara was leaving the courthouse, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Drop the case or we'll make you disappear." Her stomach twisted. Another text followed. "You think you're brave, but you're just one woman. Nobody will miss you." Her hands shook as she locked her phone. She knew exactly who it was from. She wanted to call the police, but what good would that do when the threat came from within their ranks? Instead, she called her mother. "Baby," her mother said softly after Amara poured everything out, "they want you scared. That means you're getting to them. Don't let them win. You come from women who never backed down. Don't you dare start now." Amara pressed the phone to her ear, her tears soaking the pillow. "I'm so tired, Mama." "I know," her mother whispered. "But tired women have built revolutions." By the end of the week, cracks began to show. During cross-examination, Amara presented an internal memo she had obtained through a whistleblower in the department. The memo revealed repeated complaints against Bradley and Denton, complaints that had mysteriously vanished from official records. The courtroom buzzed with outrage. Bradley's face went pale. Denton shifted nervously. "Your Honor," Amara said, her voice ringing clear, "this isn't just about one traffic stop. It's about a system that covers up abuse, protects bullies, and silences victims. If justice doesn't live here in this courtroom, then it lives nowhere." Judge Whitmore's gavel slammed, but his eyes betrayed something else now, a storm of thought, a war inside him. That evening, Whitmore sat alone in his chambers again. He thought of his daughter, how hard she had fought to make it in her firm, how many times she had told him she felt dismissed in rooms full of men. He thought of Amara, standing tall even as she trembled, refusing to break even as the system tried to crush her. And he thought of himself, how many times he had looked the other way in his decades on the bench. For the first time in years, Richard Whitmore felt shame. And for the first time, he also felt hope. The next morning, Amara entered the courtroom to find the judge already seated, his expression grave but resolute. "Before we begin today's proceedings," Whitmore announced, "I want to state for the record that this court does not condone violence or intimidation, inside or outside these walls. Miss Johnson's courage in standing here deserves respect, not harassment." and I will ensure she receives it." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Amara froze, stunned. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt the system tilt, however slightly, in her favor. The tide was turning. But the war was far from over. Do you believe corrupt systems can truly change from the inside, or does it always take outsiders like Amara to force it? Share your thoughts. I'm curious to hear where you stand. The courthouse was packed wall-to-wall the morning of the final hearing. Reporters crowded the benches, their cameras ready. Protesters outside chanted loud enough for the echoes to seep into the building. Even the air seemed heavy with expectation. Amara sat at her table, her briefcase open but untouched. She didn't need her notes anymore. Every fact, every lie, every truth she needed was carved into her bones. Across from her, Bradley sat stiff, his jaw set, his knuckles white as he clenched his fists. Denton whispered something in his ear, but Bradley's eyes stayed fixed on her, cold, sharp, dangerous. This was it. Court is now in session. Judge Whitmore's voice boomed, steadier than it had been all week. He looked out at the courtroom, then directly at Amara. "We will hear closing arguments today. And let it be clear, this court will tolerate no further misconduct. Justice will be heard." Amara rose first. Her heart hammered, but her voice was steady. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of this court," she began. "For weeks we've sat in this room, peeling back the layers of a wound that runs deep in this city. We've heard testimony, seen evidence, and even witnessed firsthand what happens when unchecked power believes itself untouchable." Her cheek tingled faintly at the memory of the slap, but she didn't flinch. She lifted her chin. "This case was never just about me. It's about the countless people who never make it to this courtroom, whose voices are silenced before they're ever heard. It's about whether the law serves all of us, or only a select few. Today, you are not just deciding my case. You are deciding whether justice still has meaning in this city." Her words rang through the silence. Then it was the defense's turn. Bradley's lawyer, a slick man in a tailored suit, stood tall. "Ladies and gentlemen, don't be fooled. This woman is a manipulator, a performer, twisting small mistakes into grand conspiracies. My clients have dedicated their lives to protecting this community. And what do they get in return? Smears, insults, and a witch hunt." He paced dramatically. "Ask yourselves this: who benefits from this case? Miss Johnson. She craves the spotlight. She thrives on attention. And she's willing to destroy the reputations of two good men to get it." He sat down, smug. All eyes turned to Judge Whitmore. The gavel struck. The court will recess for 1 hour before the ruling. During the recess, Amara stepped into the hallway. The crowd pressed around her, reporters shouting questions, protesters reaching to touch her hand, supporters chanting her name. She barely made it to a quiet corner when she felt someone grab her wrist. Bradley. His eyes burned with rage. His voice was a low growl. "You think you've won? You think some speeches and tears make you powerful?" Amara jerked her hand back. "I don't need to think it. I know it." Bradley leaned closer, his words like poison. "Careful, little girl. Accidents happen. Cars crash. People disappear. You won't always have cameras to protect you." For a moment, fear gripped her throat. But then she remembered her grandmother's words, "Stand anyway, even when your knees shake." She looked him dead in the eye. "Then I'll make sure the whole world sees you if you try." For the first time, Bradley hesitated. Just for a second. Then he shoved past her, storming down the hall. Outside, the protests swelled. The courthouse steps were a sea of signs and chants. "We see you, Amara. Justice for all. End police corruption." The energy was electric. Tense. Alive. Inside, reporters typed furiously, ready to beam the verdict across the nation. Whitmore sat in his chambers, staring at his reflection in the window. For years, he had prided himself on being impartial, detached. But impartiality now felt like cowardice. He thought of his daughter. He thought of Amara. He thought of the future of his city. When he rose from his chair, his decision was already made. The courtroom hushed as Whitmore returned to his seat. His gavel echoed like thunder. "This court has reviewed the evidence and testimony presented. It is clear that Officers Bradley and Denton engaged in misconduct unbecoming of their positions. Officer Bradley's assault, committed in this very courtroom, is undeniable. Therefore, this court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Miss Amara Johnson. Gasps. Applause. Shouts of relief. But Whitmore wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his voice solemn. Furthermore, I recommend a full investigation into the Atlanta Police Department's handling of prior complaints against these officers. Justice does not stop at one case, it must ripple outward. The room erupted. Protesters outside roared as news spread. Amara sat frozen, tears streaming down her cheeks. She had won. Against all odds, she had won. As the gavel fell one final time, Whitmore removed his glasses. He looked directly at Amara. "Miss Johnson," he said quietly, approached the bench. Confused, she stood and walked forward. The entire courtroom leaned in. Whitmore's voice dropped, but it carried. This court and this city need leaders who are unshakable, who can stand against pressure, fear, and intimidation. Today, you showed the city what true justice looks like. He removed his robe, folded it neatly, and placed it on the bench. I am retiring effective immediately. And it is my recommendation to the Judicial Committee that you, Miss Johnson, be considered for my seat. This courtroom needs you more than it needs me. The silence was deafening. Then, like a wave, the room exploded into cheers, gasps, and tears. Amara stood frozen, staring at the robe. Her hands trembled. "Judge Whitmore, I'm not." "Yes, you are," he interrupted firmly. "You've been more of a judge in this courtroom than I have in years. Take your seat, Miss Johnson." Her legs shook as she climbed the steps. She reached out, her fingers brushing the cool fabric of the robe. Slowly, almost disbelieving, she slipped it over her shoulders. The cheers grew louder, the energy filling the room like a storm. Amara sat in the judge's chair. The same chair where she had once stood trembling as a plaintiff. The same room where she had been slapped, humiliated, threatened. Now, she sat at the highest seat in the room. The courtroom quieted as she lifted the gavel. For a moment, she just stared at it, the symbol of power, of justice, of responsibility. Then she struck it once. Bang. Court is adjourned. Her voice was steady, strong, unbreakable. And for the first time, the law felt like it truly belonged to the people. Reflection question/CTA. If you were in Amara's place, rising from humiliation to unimaginable power, what would be the first change you'd make? Let me know, I want to hear your ideas. The gavel's echo still vibrated in the walls of the courtroom when the chants outside grew thunderous. Amara! 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 She sat in the judge's chair, the robe heavy on her shoulders, the weight of history pressing against her. For a moment, the world felt surreal, like she was standing outside herself, watching a dream she hadn't dared to imagine. But when she looked down at the people, faces wide with hope, eyes wet with tears, she realized this was no dream. This was destiny. News of Whitmore's retirement and Amara's shocking ascension spread like wildfire. By nightfall, national outlets carried the story. From plaintiff to judge, Black woman's historic rise stuns America. Atlanta courtroom erupts as Amara Johnson takes the bench. Some called it poetic justice. Others called it chaos. But to the people gathered outside the courthouse, it was a miracle. Candles lit the steps that evening as strangers sang hymns, prayed, and cheered. Children lifted signs with Amara's name scrawled in bright colors. Elders wept openly, whispering, "We lived to see this." Inside her small apartment, Amara sat on the floor, her phone buzzing non-stop. Old friends, reporters, even distant relatives she hadn't heard from in years reached out. Her mother called, her voice breaking. "Baby, do you know what you've done?" Amara pressed the phone to her cheek, tears streaming. "Mama, I don't even know how this happened." Her mother's tone softened, strong and warm. "It happened because you stood tall when the world tried to break you. And now you're not just standing for yourself, you're standing for all of us." The very next day, Amara walked back into the courthouse, this time through the side entrance reserved for judges. The marble walls seemed different now, less like barriers, more like guardians. She stepped into Whitmore's old chambers, where his books still lined the shelves. A note sat on the desk. Courage is the robe you now wear. Don't take it off. R.W. Amara pressed the note to her chest. But as she settled behind the desk, a knock rattled the door. It was Bradley. He was no longer in uniform. He had been suspended pending investigation, but his arrogance hadn't left him. He barged in without waiting for permission. "You don't deserve that seat," he spat. "You're a fraud. You got lucky." Amara's hands rested calmly on the desk. Her voice was steady. "I didn't get lucky. I fought. I bled. I endured. Luck had nothing to do with it." Bradley's eyes narrowed. "This isn't over. You can't erase men like me." Amara stood, her gaze piercing. "You're right. I can't erase you. But I can strip away the power you abused. And when justice is done, men like you will finally answer for every scar you've left behind." For the first time, Bradley had no comeback. He stormed out, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Amara exhaled, her hands trembling. The robe was heavy, but her spirit was heavier with purpose. Her first official case came sooner than expected. It wasn't a headline-grabbing trial. It was a young black teenager, accused of shoplifting a pair of sneakers. The prosecutor argued harshly for jail time, citing repeat offenses. But when Amara looked into the boy's eyes, she didn't see a hardened criminal. She saw exhaustion. Fear. The same look she had carried once when the system pressed down on her. She asked questions others ignored. "Why did you take them? Who do you live with? What do you need?" The truth unfolded. The boy's mother worked 3 jobs, his shoes had holes, and his school refused to let him attend gym class without proper sneakers. Instead of punishment, Amara crafted a different ruling: community service, mentorship, and enrollment in a program that provided clothing for students in need. The boy's mother wept in gratitude. The courtroom murmured. And for the first time, justice felt less like punishment and more like healing. But not everyone cheered. Editorials called her too soft. Police unions protested her bias against law enforcement. Even some fellow judges whispered that she had no right to wear the robe. Denton appeared on television, smirking as he painted himself a victim. "This was a witch hunt. We did our jobs. She's nothing but a political puppet." Amara watched, anger boiling in her veins. But she remembered her grandmother's wisdom: when you shine a light, expect the rats to scatter and squeal. Don't waste time chasing them. Instead, she focused on the people who filled her courtroom every day, people who walked in hopeless and left with dignity restored. Months passed. Investigations into Bradley and Denton deepened. Files buried for years resurfaced, complaints from dozens of citizens, all ignored. Finally, the day came. Bradley and Denton themselves stood trial, this time as defendants. Amara did not preside, ethics required another judge, but she sat in the gallery, her presence unmistakable. Witness after witness testified. Patterns of abuse, cover-ups, intimidation. The truth poured out like floodwaters breaking a dam. The jury found them guilty on multiple counts. Sentences were handed down. As Bradley was led away in cuffs, his eyes locked on Amara's. For the first time she saw fear, not in herself, but in him. Justice had turned the tables. 1 year later, the courthouse held a ceremony. The governor, local leaders, and national figures gathered. Amara Johnson was officially sworn in, not just as a temporary replacement, but as the permanent judge of the very court where she once stood humiliated. Her mother held the Bible. Her community filled the room. Her grandmother's picture sat in her pocket. "I, Amara Johnson," she recited, "do solemnly swear to uphold justice without fear or favor, to protect the rights of all people, and to ensure that this courtroom is a place where dignity cannot be stolen." Applause thundered. As she looked out, she saw the faces of children staring up at her with awe, whispering to one another, "One day I can be like her." That evening, long after the courthouse emptied, Amara sat alone in her chambers. The robe hung on the back of her chair. The gavel rested on her desk. She opened her grandmother's Bible, the one passed down through generations. On the inside cover was a faded note: "Justice may delay, but it will not die." Amara smiled through her tears. She lifted the gavel, feeling its weight, then whispered into the quiet. "For every voice silenced, I'll speak. For every door closed, I'll open one. For every hand raised against us, I'll raise justice higher." She struck the gavel once, the sound echoing through the empty chamber. Bang. And with that, Amara Johnson, once humiliated now triumphant, sealed her place in history as the judge who turned pain into power and injustice into redemption. What lesson did Amara's journey teach you most? Resilience, courage, or the power of justice? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your answer may inspire someone who needs this story today. And don't forget, subscribe for more powerful stories like this one.